I'll just suggest that people move forward, if you don't mind. I mean, you're welcome to sit way back there, but easier to hear if you're sitting closer. Is Jill here? Is Jill Branson here? Anyways, so within our procedural bylaw, when there are questions from the public for council, the question has to be provided the day before the meeting, and then before the formal council meeting actually begins, the mayor or chair will read the question that has been received, and then the mayor or chair, that's me, will provide an answer. And once we have done that, I'll move into the formal meeting of council as shown on the agenda. And again, I encourage you to come in closer. Thank you. That's better. Nice and cozy. Great. Thanks very much. So before I do move into the formal meeting, we'll just take a few minutes. Anybody that wants to leave and not stay through the formal meeting is welcome to leave at that point, and we'll close the doors. So I'll just read the question as submitted. Ms. Branson's question. Jill? Where is Jill? So what is the purpose of continuing the Canmore Rec Center renovation project dressed up as a life cycle maintenance project that does not satisfy community needs, nor has considered the outcome of the pending Olympic bid? I'm asking council to direct administration to stop this now scaled back project that lacks community-wide support and before shovels are in the ground. What will this council's legacy be concerning our beloved Canmore Rec Center, most certainly a huge part of Canmore's social fabric and long history? So in regards to the first question, what is the purpose of continuing the project? While there are some functional elements within the facility that are proposed for change, the vast majority of the costing of this project is to manage life cycle and maintenance. The core areas of the Canmore Rec Center are now 35 years old, and the gymnastics area, which was the old pool, is 31 years old. The heating and ventilation system in these facilities typically have a life expectancy of 25 years, which has been exceeded now by 10 years. Each season of operation without major maintenance at this point is risking a mechanical or structural failure, which could result in a completely unplanned shutdown and significant interruption to all activities within the facility, with additional costs being incurred. So this is the primary purpose of continuing with the Rec Center project. And as a recent example of such a scenario or the outcome, we can look to the roof failure of the Fairview Arena just this past February in Calgary, which was a snow-related incident. And coincidentally, that arena was 36 years old. So essentially the same as ours. In regards to the second question about pausing the project to consider the outcome of a possible bid for the 2026 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So the Rec Center is not within the scope of facilities that would be required to host the Games. And there have been no discussions of including infrastructure enhancements for the Rec Center as a part of the bidding process. Of course, at this time, it has not been decided whether a 2026 bid will even proceed. And if it were to proceed, then the host city for the 2026 Winter Games won't be selected by the International Olympics Committee until late 2019. If we were to support and then win a bid, it would be several years before firm plans for any facility upgrades would be finalized and work started. So to be clear, at this time, there is no indication that the Rec Center would be considered at all as any part of a potential games bid. In regards to the third question, regarding a possible legacy for council, for this council, I would suggest that if the question of a legacy is important to councillors during the consideration of this project, that the legacy of prudent fiscal management of town assets should be seen as very important. In regards to the fourth question or request, that council direct administration to stop this project, I'll say that for the reasons given to these other questions, the long-term viability of the rec center is uncertain, and the prudent approach with current information is to proceed as approved. I will note that the tender process has just concluded and that a report will be presented to council on May the 15th regarding the results of the tender bids. So 2 weeks tonight, come again, and you'll be able to hear what has happened with the tender. Now, in closing, I'd like to acknowledge that the amount of interest shown in this matter is a very strong indication of how much people in our community care about our community, which is really a great thing. And while at times we may seem divided by various issues, at the end of the day, we all care deeply about Canmore, and we all do what we can to keep our town strong. At this point, I'll take a short break to allow anybody that's not interested in staying for the formal meeting. We'll close the sliding doors, and then we'll call the meeting to order. Okay, so this time I'll call the meeting to order. And looking to the agenda, are there changes? Yes?
Yes, Your Worship, we would like to add an in-camera item regarding the Canmore Recreation Centre Life Cycle Maintenance Project contract.
Okay, thank you. Any other changes? If that, I'll move the agenda be approved as amended. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Before we move on to the minutes, we have one delegation. Dr. Remppel, you're invite you to the podium.
Is it on? Yeah, seems to be. Well, thank you, Your Worship and members of Council. This matter has been on my mind for well over a decade, and specifically, it is Section 222 of the Municipal Government Act, which deals with petitions. And it says, unless otherwise provided in this or any other enactment, only electors of a municipality are eligible to be petitioners. And in 223 it says, number of petitions to be sufficient. The petition must be signed by electors of the municipality equal to the number of at least 10% of the population. My concern has been that the number of electors and the number of citizens can vary greatly. And I've tried to communicate this with Municipal Affairs for a number of years and didn't get anywhere. So eventually I did write a letter to the then Premier Alison Redford, and I didn't submit that letter, but it apparently didn't make it into your package because it was too late. And I just want to quote a paragraph or two to emphasize what I'm trying to say. In other words, my concern at the time, which I shared with Municipal Affairs, was that a petition must be signed by electors equal to at least 10% of the population. The ratio between population and the number of electors, however, is unrelated and may vary widely from municipality to municipality. In other words, the requirements for a petition to be valid change from municipality to municipality. It wasn't uniform across the province. A past councillor advised that when he was campaigning this was for Canmore, 30% of the people he contacted door to door and otherwise said they were not eligible to vote. Many of them were US or European citizens. Just now, and this was during a previous election, another councillor confirmed a similar percentage, saying that a lot of people said they were not eligible to vote, however, asked as to how else they could support his candidacy. So, and with many immigrants from Asia working in the hospitality industry, this trend has only increased. Now, this is a severe shortcoming, in my opinion, of the democratic process. Not a single one of the previous progressive conservative governments have ever responded to my concern. Now, the only response I got was from Jeff Wilson, and he, at the time, was the official opposition critic for Municipal Affairs. And he confirmed, you have also provided me with clear and rational thinking, which I always try to do. Then, finally, the provincial government initiated a review of the Municipal Government Act. And I made that submission once again, in addition to another one, and that actually was accepted. I was surprised to include municipalities in the jurisdiction of the Office of the Ombudsman. So apparently that has been accepted. Now, with regards to my initial concern about the the validation of a petition, I finally got a response, a letter from the Honorable Shay Anderson. He's now the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and he advised that they had not accepted my recommendation. However, they had changed, or they provided an addition to the Municipal Government Act under Section 226.1. Now, a council of a municipality may, by bylaw, reduce the percentage required under Section 223, 2A or B, whichever is applicable for petitions to the council. So here is my question or my suggestion or my request, council to consider a bylaw to address this in the form of either, and here I'm not sure whether the Act would allow council to change the wording and do what, in my opinion, the provincial government should have done, could and should have done with a stroke of a pen, to change it from 10% of the population to 10% of the electorates, which in my opinion, makes the only sense. If council is not allowed to change the wording, then change the percentage to reflect 10% of the electorates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was interested to note in the letter that you included from Minister Anderson, it seems to me that what his letter suggests does not actually echo what's in the MGA. Mind you, he's relatively new minister, so...
I've difficulty hearing, sorry.
Oh, sorry. So in Minister Anderson's letter, he suggests that each municipality now has the authority to pass a bylaw altering the percentage of population requirements set out in Section 223. But in fact, the minister, I think, misspeaks himself, and that's not allowed within the new MGA. But as you've noted, the new MGA does allow municipalities to consider reducing the percentage of electors that are required to sign a petition, which is essentially what you're suggesting, isn't it?
Well, it's my understanding that council does not make a decision at the same meeting at the...
No, I'm just clarifying your question.
I leave it to council, and I'm looking forward to council's decision.
Great. So generally what happens, as I'm sure you were informed, is the request will come up under business arising at the next business meeting, which is in 2 weeks. And under business arising, then council will make generally one of three decisions, one of which is to simply accept your request for information. The other is to make a decision on the request, or the third decision is to direct administration to return at a later date with a report with recommendations. So we'll be discussing this in 2 weeks under business arising.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now then to the minutes of the April the 10th meeting. Oh no, that's a public hearing, April the 10th public hearing. There are errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking now then to the minutes of the regular meeting of council for Tuesday, April 17th. Are there errors or omissions on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move they be Councillor Comfort.
Misspelling of Jossie Asnong's last name, that's it.
Okay, we'll take that as an editorial change. Thank you. Move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item G1, the Water Utility Rehabilitation Fund Adjustment. Mr. Canmore.
Good evening, Mayor Borman and members of council. As mentioned, myself and I have a couple of members from EPCOR here to do a presentation to council on the water utility and specifically about the rehab fund and doing a mid-year adjustment to that. So the recommendation we have in front of council is the council approve an increase to the 2018 operating budget to the tune of about $1.4 million to fund a deficit in the utility rehab fund funded by reducing the budgeted transfer to the water utility reserve. So the reasons for that, and maybe before I get into that, is I'll go into a brief explanation about the rehab fund. There's a couple ways that we maintain the utility. The one we pay EPCOR for, we have an O&M budget, which is for them to do the work required to operate the utility. We've learned over the years that
operations and maintenance, wouldn't it?
Yes, the O&M. Yes, thank you. Beyond that, we do have costs that require us to do repairs on the assets themselves, and they can fluctuate. And as the utility, especially the new wastewater treatment plant, gets older, it's now just over 20 years old, those costs start to increase. And so we have established a rehabilitation fund, a rehab fund that is included in the operating budget that allows EPCOR to do work that is beyond your basic operating of a utility, so that's the lab work and the testing and those types of things, but to do physical repairs of the assets, both on a preventative or a corrective position. So preventative means that the manufacturer, when we get a pump, says it needs to be maintained or looked at 3 times a year, so it's put in the schedule and they go 3 times a year to look at it. Corrective are ones where they're emergency, things that are unplanned. So if we have a water main break, that type of thing, those are unplanned. And we have actually scheduled a certain number of dollars to be assigned for that because we've looked at over trends. They typically happen from year to year. And you can see here on the screen, you can see from 2016 what the values have been. So they're not small value dollars by any means, but we have, those are the numbers that EPCOR has been spending. And the way it typically works is we do it in, as we get into our final years of essentially a 20-year agreement with EPCOR. Each 5-year term, we establish what these numbers are. And some years EPCOR will spend less, some years EPCOR will spend more, and then after 5 years, they should level off. And so EPCOR is not out of pocket, and we get good value on making sure that our assets have been maintained. The threshold that we have for projects or repairs that are applied to the rehab fund are ones that exceed $5,822, and I should highlight that is different than what we have in the staff report. We have $6,700. It should be the $5,822. It does go up each year by 2.2%, which is the cost of construction. So anything that's below that would be covered by EPCOR. It's their cost to cover the cost to run the utility. Any repairs that exceed that would be applied to the rehab fund. So that's the threshold that we use. That has worked very well for the last 18 years. But then around Christmas in 2016, we started to have problems that the rehab fund could no longer support. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Dennis Letourneau, who is the site manager for EPCOR, to talk and explain a little bit to council about what has occurred starting then up into 2017.
Okay. Thanks for being here, Mr. Letourneau. I'm sorry we don't have any door prizes to hand out to EPCOR.
Okay, just this one time. Thank you, Mayor and councilors. Most of you have met me and know me, and those of you who were on council at the beginning of last year will know that 2017 is not a year that I would like to repeat anytime soon. We did lose a couple co-workers in 2017, and on top of that, we, as Andres alluded to, incurred some challenging operational issues that put pressure both on our staff resources and on the rehab fund. What I'd like to do is just to recap very briefly what was really about an hour presentation that I gave to Mike Fark and Andreas Como in great detail, going over all of the underlying items supporting the high-level issues that I'm going to highlight for you today within 10 minutes or so. There were three major challenges on the rehab fund. One was a wastewater treatment plant process disruption, in which the plant was severely diminished in its ability to remove ammonia before returning water back to the river. The second one was an inordinate amount of distribution repairs, specifically water main breaks that occurred throughout the winter of 2016 to 2017, which are also covered by the rehab fund and are somewhat unpredictable because it's at Mother Nature's whim. The third item was other emergency repairs or unplanned, unexpected that occurred throughout the year. And then finally, of course, the scheduled rehab work, which was scheduled to be done, as Andreas alluded to, and which I had to rein in considerably as we saw these other items taking precedence as the year progressed. So quickly, we'll look at the very first item, which was a process disruption. This isn't going to be a technical presentation. I'm going to do this within 10 minutes. But for the benefit of new counselors, on the bottom picture there, you see what looks like to be 5 bathtubs. Those are actually 5 inside filters, and they remove the ammonia before we return the water back to the river. They work very simply. The water percolates up through them. There's this little fine, porous, crushed rock-like substance called biolite. And there's little bacteria living in those porous areas, and it's those bacteria that remove the ammonia. So as the water percolates up through, they remove the ammonia. That bacteria was severely diminished sometime in late December. At the time, we didn't know why, but to the point where the plant's ability to remove ammonia was diminished, and we did not meet our approval limit for TAN removal on December. TAN is total ammonia and nitrogen, but when you hear the word TAN, just think ammonia. It's just that that's what's in our approval. The following 9 months of 2017 resulted in 6 additional approval violations before we had this wrestled to the ground. We brought in specialists from that deep bench that EPCOR has, and I availed myself of it. We had process engineers, microbiologists, technicians, other plant managers with relevant experience, and we gathered together January 1st and started daily conference calls, and this process of technical investigations and exploration went on for 10 months before we had finally identified 4 smoking guns that had sort of come together over the years and rose up at that one time at Christmas 2016 to severely diminish the ammonia removing ability of the plant. We had to do plant repairs. We replaced flow transmitters. We added level transmitters, ammonia analyzers. We instrumented the plant enough so that we could understand what was going on and thus use that data to understand what had happened to bring us in this situation. That took, again, 10 months and $475,000 to complete. And one of the biggest smoking guns that came out of that investigation was the realization that there was a design flaw in the original construction back in 1996 that was prevalent through all of the BAF plants built in North America and Europe at that time. It was the aeration system at the bottom of each of those filters that supplies oxygen to that bacteria so that it can live was severely compromised. We'd lost somewhere between 30 and 50% of that aeration system. And the only way to fix it was to go into each of those 10 filters, remove all of that biolite, 1,000 cubic meters. And that biolite, there's $1 million of biolite in that plant right now. It's pricey stuff and it's fragile. You just can't simply grab it with a front end loader and swing it out. You've got to put it into a slurry. You've got to use a special induction system that we manufactured based on a similar system in Chateauguay, Quebec, and carefully, gently remove all of that biolite out of the filter, store it in those yellow bins that you see in the distance. And once we get to the bottom of the filter, which you see on the bottom left photograph, we then replaced over 3,500 components in the bottom of that filter. And then we did that again another 9 times. The challenge was we had to do it in a 2-month window. These filters, when they're brought back online, recover a lot quicker in warm weather. Our pieces and parts weren't going to arrive until mid to late July. And as we all know, mid to late September is a crapshoot when it comes to temperatures. We can get cold pretty quickly then. So we had 2 months to get this done, and many, many people felt this was impossible. We engaged the help of technical services in Edmonton. They sent down the top project manager. And in fact, he was just awarded a few days ago one of the highest awards within EPCOR for the job he achieved, which we're calling the miracle on the bow, because that project would have cost $1 million if we'd done it each filter one by one, but we did it in $660,000 because we did it quickly and we did it efficiently. And in fact, that 660 is now 600 because EPCOR has agreed to remove their management fee of 10% on that particular item. The total cost of that process disruption, both the technical investigation, the testing, the equipment, and that rehabilitation was just over 1.1 million. That money did not evaporate in the thin air. It resulted in $750,000 of tangible capital assets that are now sitting on the town's balance sheets that wasn't there before. Let's move on quickly to the second item, which was the DNC emergency repairs. Specifically, for the benefit of those new councillors, DNC stands for distribution and collection. Distribution is the pumps and the pipes that bring clean drinking water to the public. And collection is the pumps and the pipes that bring the wastewater back to the plant to get treated before it's returned to the river. Our issues were in the distribution side, specifically main breaks. What happened in the winter of 2016 to 17 was we basically had the worst winter since EPCOR took control of the operation in 2000 when it came to frost and frozen services and main breaks. We had, typically we have 1, 2, maybe 3 main breaks in the winter. That season we had 7. And we had a series of frozen water services, primarily in the Larch area, all due to the worst ground frost event that anybody could remember. If you recall, that year, the cold hit before the snow came. Generally what happens is the snow comes first, blankets the ground. And when the cold hits, it insulates the ground somewhat. But in November of that year, the cold came fast and furious. It froze the ground deeply, and when the snow came, it was too late. And so we had a series of main breaks. We have a budget of just over $100,000 for main breaks, which is usually ample to deal with these issues. In fact, that year we spent close to $400,000 dealing with all of the main breaks that came out of the rehab fund again. The reason you're seeing $338,000 is because one of my star operators, Kelly Attridge, in the bottom right, seen there working her magic with the detection system, managed to detect a couple leaks. And so we were able to address the repairs that resulted from that with the leak detection and repair budget. But in total, we spent close to $400,000 just dealing with main breaks. In the top right is the famous Christmas Eve break that I'm sure most of you heard about who were on council at the time. We got the water back 2 hours before 5 o'clock Christmas Eve. Otherwise, it would have been 70 houses in Silvertip out of water for Christmas. So operators came out from vacation. We brought contractors out from Calgary, and we worked furiously to get it back. And I personally knocked on every door of those 70 houses to let them know that there was a possibility we weren't going to have water, and providing solutions that they could use to get through the Christmas Eve. The third and last challenge was the emergency repairs that were unexpected, unplanned that took place. And this ranged from $6,000 right up to, in the bottom left, a $100,000 repair. We channel the water through the wastewater plant, usually with concrete channels. That concrete by far and large is in good shape. But for some reason, the concrete in those specific 2 channels that you see in the bottom left in our arc screen room was not to the caliber of the rest of the concrete. We could not see that. It was hidden below the water line, and some chunks of concrete came off, landed in those channels, and those huge metal brushes that you see that rotate and clean our screens engaged the concrete, warped, broke. We destroyed the gearboxes, the electric motors took hits, and we had to bring in crane trucks to remove these items, have them fixed and fabricated in Cochrane and Calgary. Of course, no one makes gearboxes like that anymore. It had to be rebuilt. And by the time we'd done, we of course then went to the other channel, fixed the concrete there. So that was an example of an unexpected break at the high end of the scale. It also varied too, on the right-hand screen, someone in the public decided to use one of our roadways to probably turn one of their trucks. I'm assuming they hadn't driven that truck very much because they narrowly missed the wooden support post holding up the corner of the roof, but they did succeed in slamming into the I-beam and actually permanently warping it to the point where it was condemned by a structural engineer, so we had to get that fixed. That was a $20,000 touch. So it varied all over the spectrum. We have actually gotten a condition assessment report also that was just delivered, and I've just shared it with Andreas this morning. We're going to read it together to assist us moving forward into the 2019 and 2020 seasons to be able to predict these sorts of unexpected breaks so that we're not caught off guard with those sort of repairs. Of course, we had $833,000 scheduled to be done as rehab work, and when these other items took precedence and started putting pressure on the rehab fund, I tried to rein that in as best I could. I canceled what projects I could. We stopped a bunch of them. A couple of the items had to continue, such as maintenance of generators at all the lift stations. We couldn't skimp on that because when the power goes out, it's those generators that keep the sewage going back to the plant. Some of the projects we'd signed POs in January, the skids were being built, the trucks were going to roll, so we couldn't stop those. But at least at the end of the day, the $833,000 that was scheduled to be spent was reduced down to $368 by the end of the year. It was the best I could do in trying to rein in those costs. That being said, all of those numbers together still amounted to $2.3 million. And as Andreas pointed out earlier, we had a budget of $837,900 on the rehab fund. The excess of 1.46 was paid for by EPCOR. There was no funding available immediately to address these issues, and they had to be addressed immediately. We postponed everything we could to capital work, but everything that could not be postponed was built and repaired. EPCOR has also absorbed the financing costs of carrying that $1.4 million through 2017 and the 4 months of 2018. And to try to reduce that amount as much as we can, we've also voluntarily removed over $100,000 of management fees, which are pertaining to the BAF rehab activities, which brings the final amount down to 1.36 in the bottom right-hand corner. So with this, I think I'll ask Andreas to come back up and speak more to the financial side of things, and then we can answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Dennis. So as Dennis pointed out, we had this, we were made aware of this later in 2017. Unfortunately, it was past the window where we were able to include it and have it as part of the 2018 operating adjustments that were presented to council. So that's why we're here, and I think at this point we also have a more refined number of what the final costs came out to. And as Dennis mentioned, EPCOR has been carrying those costs up to this point. So they had approached administration, and so we had a conversation. We walked through the details that was shared with you today, and we were trying to determine what was the next steps on how we deal with this overage in spending. We feel as administration that those costs were required. They were prudent, and they needed to occur. And so we felt that they were justified, and so now we're in a situation of how do we fund those costs. And so that's why we're in front of council this evening. As you can see here, the number we're talking about, sorry, I'm just going to grab the cursor. There's the $103,000 of the management fee that, so the work that EPCOR does, there's an actual cost that they pay a contractor or whoever does the work, but there's some oversight, project oversight, the procurement, the administration of those costs has a cost as well, and so we fund EPCOR a 10% management fee. So that $103,000 was the management fee, 100% associated with the bath upgrade. So that big exercise where they took all the BioLite and changed all the air filters in the bath cells. So they offered to do that, and also they have agreed to cover the financing costs for carrying those costs up to this point as well when we sat down to talk. What I also wanted to highlight is, and it's kind of a side note, is this $516,000, which was the opening balance in 2016, and with the previous council, we had, again, related to that rehab fund, we had actually gone about almost 5 years of not fully implementing the threshold of that $5,800. So when we had done an adjustment, we went back and took a look at the last 5 years in the rehab fund and where costs were assigned. There was about $516,000 that were misassigned and should have been carried and covered by EPCOR, and they were not. And they were inappropriately assigned to the rehab fund. So that was a value of about $516,000 that EPCOR has invested in our assets in 2016. And I bring that up because that's when the year started, when we started having the problems at Christmas in 2016, when we first started to violate. And then you can see we started with like I said, there's an ebb and flow to each year. Then this is what they actually spent, the adjustment, and so we end up with a overspend of about $1.4 million. And so what we had discussed with EPCOR was the utilities' ability to pay that fee in 2018 and clear the books of that, so that we weren't in a position where all of a sudden EPCOR was not, they didn't have the funds to do the work that was required, in particular the preventative work, the scheduled work that should be occurring to make sure that our assets are functioning and maintained properly. So that's why we are in front of council tonight, making a request that we've had an opportunity to look at the utility rate model, make sure that we have the adequate reserves to be able to support this, this opportunity to reduce the transfer to reserves and make sure that by the end of year 5 in 2021 that we would actually still be above our target policy, reserve policy of $6.5 million, and you can see here. So this is with the adjustment made. So if we didn't take the 1.4, you would see this blue line would be $1.4 million higher than what it is right now. So you can see there is the opportunity to reduce the reserve balance and still hit 6.5 or go above the target by year 5, 2021, which is how we typically want to manage the utility reserve. So with that, there's the recommendation. And if there are any questions for myself or EPCOR, presentation is finished.
It sounds like the perfect storm for water and wastewater. One question that I have related to the long description of all the things that went wrong. One of the things stood out is, I mean, clearly there were some things happening that were absolutely unpredictable, and you noted the first time it had ever happened. In fact, it was a design flaw, I think you noted. And I guess one of the positive aspects of this whole experience is the fact that EPCOR was there and had the technical expertise to resolve the issue, figure out what was going on and fix it, which has always been one of the rationales or one of the benefits for the town and other municipalities to contract that very complex work to EPCOR. You have access to national and international experts, so in that way things worked out well. I was just curious about the experience through the winter months, though, and the there were a lot of breaks, a lot more breaks through the winter months because of the anomaly in the weather and the ground frost. Do you think that that's totally an anomaly, or is that a precursor of things to come with climate change? I mean, are we going to see that kind of surprise more frequently do you think? And I guess you're just guessing.
Yeah. This is somewhat a bit of a guess. It's something that we have discussed even amongst Blair Birch and Andreas and myself, if this is a changing trend or not. We don't know yet if it's a trend, but we do know that, for instance, this past winter, we only had 2 main breaks, which is a very typical winter that's well accommodated for in the $100,000 that's budgeted for main breaks. So as far as any trend, there's no trend yet. There was certainly an anomaly that year, quite a sharp one, both in main breaks and frozen services. And we're hoping that it remains an anomaly.
Yeah. Obviously, if we start seeing it becoming more regular, we're going to have to reconsider the whole funding and target of the reserve. Councillor Seeley, did you have a question?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Mr. Como, just on the financials and getting updates, it seemed like the updates were lagging a little bit. Moving forward, could we be in a better position to get more regular updates so that this isn't a surprise and we can budget accordingly?
Absolutely, Councillor Seeley. When we had done the debrief after this, one of the suggestions was that we meet on a quarterly basis to review the rehab. That may be something to do in the future. At this point, I think what was really clear for both parties is that when these types of things are occurring and we're starting to commit significant dollars, that we do more regular conversations to just make the other party aware that, you know what, this is big, it's going to cost a lot, we need to talk about how we're going to fund this. Yeah. Unfortunately, at this point, we were just really focused on trying to resolve the issue and address all the violations that were occurring as a result of it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yep, I just was curious about the 7 TAN violations, was it? Are there consequences at the provincial level or for the regulators level that go forward on our record and that kind of thing? Or
Yeah, that's a
that's
very good question. Very good question. And in fact, we were contacted twice throughout that month, or those 10 months. We were contacted in February by the federal enforcement authorities who wanted information. They were concerned about unionized ammonia being released into the river. We supplied them, right on that same conversation, lab results. They did some back-of-the-envelope calculations on the phone call, and they determined that there was no harm being done to the aquatic environment from that release, and they closed the books. I was then contacted again in August by the provincial enforcement authorities, the Alberta Environment, and they were, again, wanted an update on how things were going. We were right in the midst of that huge BAF rehab project at that time, which they were very interested in. And they were very encouraged by the expertise we brought into it, the diligence, and the amount of effort that went into trying to debug and resolve this issue, and the solution that we hit upon, which was the complete rehab of those filters, in addition with the other items that we addressed. So they again wished us the best of luck, and we just updated them at the end to show that everything was fine. And in fact, since this project's concluded, the wastewater treatment plant has had the best TAN removal in the recorded history of the plant. So we know we got it right.
Debug, very good. I have a question about.
It's supposed to be the other way.
Yeah, bugged up. And then you also mentioned that other municipalities had similar problems in terms of the BAF filters. Can you speak to that just very briefly, like how many municipalities and to what, is it like a huge problem?
Yeah, these plants, the generation of plants that we have here from the mid-90s to the late 90s had the design flaw, which essentially was the air enters the bottom of the filters in pipes. It's then diffused through these circular black diffusers. And it is those circular black diffusers that had a tendency under turbulent high pressure conditions to blow apart. Once they blow apart, then you don't get a nice even fine distribution of air to all the bacteria. You have air that's shooting up in the little channels here and there, and it's leaving lots of dead spots throughout, and thus the bacteria is not alive in those areas. So when you lose 30 to 50% of your aeration system, you're also losing 30 to 50% of your bacteria and your ability to process ammonia. The redesign that they did with the new filters that you saw a picture of, we put on the new design, which has a locking feature which won't come apart. in the future. But we were in communication with plants in Ontario and Quebec and the U.S. All of the same generations were experiencing the same issues and had to undergo the same rehabilitation projects. In fact, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel because we had such a tight timeline to get this done. We flew down to Chateauguay, Quebec, where they had already rehabbed their filter, and we copied them as best as we could. That little device you saw that was sucking the induction system, that was their design that we copied, had it fabricated, assembled, and on-site in 10 days. And use that to meet the timelines that we needed. So we certainly weren't alone in this challenge, but we didn't want to bumble along and learn from the experience. We went to the people who had successfully done it to increase our chances of minimizing the costs.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Reminding or speaking of the decision back in the 90s to implement this sort of a system reminded me that I was not a council in those days, God help us, but I recall the conversations in the community when that process was being debated, and coincidentally it was Dr. Remppel who was quite vocal in the community about the choice being made, and I know that he stood in front of council in the day, that was Mayor Dick, and argued with probably everything, but interesting coincidence. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. I just wanted to clarify that the design failure has been corrected and that we're not dealing with a capacity issue now. We're actually within capacity.
That's correct. Yeah, the tan removal ability of the plant is performing per spec.
Okay. And I think there was another mention in the report from Mr. Como that says there's no proposed utility rate increase at this time because we can still be on target for our achieving our reserve balance.
Exactly. This was to demonstrate, and sorry, I forgot to just remind council that because there is the capacity within the utility reserve to accommodate this mid-year ask and still meet the be above the target in year 5, there's no need to do any adjustments to the 2018 rates.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. DeSoto, did you have something to add?
Since you've turned on my mic, sure, I'll add. I was going to supplement Mr. Letourneau's response to Councillor Comfort's question on whether there are fines for violations, et cetera. And I think it's important to understand that the premise of the approval to operate, it functions on a self-reporting basis. So if there is a violation, EPCOR has to self-report, and there are fines for not reporting. And so what the regulators want to see is that there's a process and a plan in place to resolve the issues that have been self-reported. So it's very important that you do report.
While it's clearly acknowledged that what happened through the past year isn't the preferred way for things to roll out, that preferably we anticipate expenses such as that and pre-budget to accommodate those expenses. But when completely unforeseen circumstance should arise that's particularly expensive as this was, that's good indication that justification for why we build and carry large reserves. I mean, we have money in reserve for such events. Preferably you see it coming and budget to draw from the reserve before it happens, but in this case, given your report, the funds are there in the reserve to essentially to cover the costs that were incurred last year, and the reserve balance will continue to grow towards our target balance. So in that way, it's reassuring that our financial planning is solid. No, I thought I had a more specific question around the maybe if I sit for a moment, it'll come back to me. Oh, I know. It's just an observation. We've got to get the new councillors out to the water and wastewater treatment plant. It's always been one of the highlights for me when we get to tour that plant. It's pretty interesting, and also it's reassuring as a councillor to see the strength of expertise and support that we have through our partners at EPCOR. And again, this is a pretty solid example of why that was a good decision, however many years ago it was, to contract EPCOR. You said 18 years ago. So thanks very much for being here to provide the report and answer questions. And with that, I will move the council approve an increase to the 2018 operating budget by $1,359,290 to fund a deficit in the Utility Rehabilitation Fund, funded by reducing the budgeted transfer to the Water Utility Reserve. Speaking to the motion, I'd be happy to support this motion for the reasons I detailed in my last little ramble. I'm glad that the reserve was there, that allowed us to do that critical work, or we wouldn't be in the position we are right now with continued good practice in our wastewater treatment. And given the emergency nature of the draw from the reserve, or the need for the draw, I'm quite supportive of the direction to fund that from that reserve. Is there other discussion on the motion? Councillor Comfort?
So I have to say, I never really understood why we contracted this out, and now I understand why we contract this out. Because of the deep resources that the utility EPCOR has, and we couldn't do it without you. I can't imagine what the cost would have been if we had had an in-house crew. So, thank you very much.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thanks very much. Moving on to item G2, the Canmore RCMP multi-year financial plan. Mr. Burt?
Good evening, Mayor Borman, members of council. It's now the Greg Burt show for the next hour and a half. I'm going to start out with the Canmore RCMP multi-year financial plan. Staff Sergeant Enius is behind me. He's going to be walking you through the details of the multi-year financial plan. Before I turn it over to staff, I wanted to highlight a few points. This is the first time we've brought forward a multi-year financial plan for approval. This is being conducted pursuant to our agreement with the RCMP. For our new members, and as a reminder for current council members, we did sign an agreement with the RCMP in 2012, and it's a 20-year agreement to provide policing services. There is a termination clause on March 31st. We would need to provide 24 months notice. We have no intention to terminate that, but just wanted to let you know, because it probably gets a little bit scary when you hear 20 years. Are we locked in? I want to let you know the plan was reviewed by the Canmore Policing Committee at the April 11th meeting. The plan was supported for planning purposes. Our committee chair, Nick Servos, Nick, if you want to give a wave, is in the audience this evening to show his support, and if you have any questions for him. I want to be clear that this is a planning document. It'll be reviewed annually, and any request to increase positions will be part of the town's regular budget process. If approved for planning purposes, this does not bind council to any approval of future position requests. I view it similar to other departments' master plans that include staff and resources, similar to the IT master plan or the fire rescue master plan. I'm going to turn it over to Staff Sergeant Eneas to walk you through the plan, and I'll be here to answer any questions you have as well.
Thank you, sir. Staff Sergeant, and welcome to council.
Good evening. Thank you. Good to go.
It's all yours.
So, as the introduction was there by Mr. Burt, that this became a mandatory piece of the Municipal Police Service Agreement, and looks like mandatory is, what, 6 years after the fact? So what they did in division was they worked on the 15,000 plus communities first. They completed their multi-year financial plan, and they were all submitted and signed. And then they began to work on the communities with 15,000 or less to complete our submission. The first time I saw it was January. So a lot of work had to be done, and a lot of back and forth in communication between us and the town, and then us and division at headquarters, in updating stats and getting the data that was necessary to complete this information. So the plan includes a listing of the MPSA positions, a listing of resources required to support the service, and a forecast of future year costs. The overview goes into our statistical data and our police to population ratio in 2017, and at any time if you want to ask questions or if you're already familiar with the information, don't hesitate to interrupt and we can move along as quickly as you need.
Thank you.
So the Canmore Municipal Detachment 7 is 1 per 754 persons, whereas the Municipal Division average is 1 per 756. Criminal Code investigations are 58 per regular member, whereas the division-wide is 87. Our Criminal Code offenses for Canmore increased by 1% between 2016 and 2017. The numbers in parentheses are the actual representation of the file numbers. So there's a 5-year increase from 2013 of 991 or 21%. Total criminal code offenses for Canmore Municipal Detachment increased by 1%. The person's crimes increased by 25%, and the person's crimes are including assault, criminal harassment, and uttering threats. Property crimes increased by 2% from 576 file numbers in 2016 to 587 2017, to a 5-year increase of 35% to 434. This increase is recognized as our criminal code offenses of theft under $5,000, mischief, and possession of stolen goods, break and enter, decreased. And other criminal code offenses, which are several that are not those, such as extortion, homicides, robberies, arson. Those will be in other criminal code. They decreased by 6%. Spousal abuse has increased by 13%. 2016 we had 67 file numbers. 2017 we had increased to 76. The 5-year increase is at 138%. Yep.
Councillor Comfort.
So I'm just curious, do you work with the Family and Support Services at all with those stats and those?
On an as-needed basis. We do meet frequently. We have, at the beginning of my tenure here, we did meet regularly, and what we were meeting about was the Harmony Project, the incidents of sexualized assault. So that was a piece that we worked on together, but not since, really.
Okay.
And what, I guess some of the question that, or some of the information I can relate on that is we also have a victim services.
Yeah.
And they are police-based victim services, so they are contacted in the first instance on these spousal assault matters, as well as if there are children involved, we do involve the social services aspect.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Staff Sergeant, just in regards to the first bullet that you noted, the person crimes increasing by 25%. And you know, jumping ahead of you a little bit, I'm noting that that our Canmore's crime severity index rating was the lowest in the province.
Yep.
So that number of increased by 25%, how do you interpret that, and what do you...
The crime severity index, that was related to files in 2016. I have yet to see a 2017 file report on the crime severity index. What I can relate to that is just the increase of people coming into Canmore. On the spousal abuse side of things, when I did a review, it was about 60-40, 60 being residents of Canmore, 40% being guests or visitors within our commercial accommodations. So to relate that is to be a greater number, and violence, generally crime severity as it relates to violence within the incident.
I see.
Yeah. So once I see a 2017 report on the CSI, then we'll know that all these numbers will be relatable. But everything comes out 4 to 6 months after the fact.
Okay, thank you.
Demographics, and you need to cover that. Economy. It's been readily identified and spoken to about the need for affordable housing. Then I'll move right into Canmore Municipal Detachment Resources. You can see our current numbers: 1 staff sergeant, 1 sergeant, 2 corporals, 13 constables, and 7, which total to 17 of general duty officers. General investigation section officers, 1 corporal, 1 constable. Equates to 2. We have currently 3 support staff, so it brings our total municipal contingent to 22. The next paragraph defines how these positions are paid for. In our current rate, we are at 70-30. 70% the town pays for, 30% the province of Alberta pays for. And when the census arises in 2021, the expectation is that we'll likely be greater than 15,000 in our population base, which we'll have a year's grace to activate a 90% versus 10% payment, which in today's dollars would be about $660,000. 2008 was the last time we saw an increase of 1 officer, and this position was funded by the photo radar program. We covered the police to population ratio, which is often referred to as cop to pop. Working towards some of the duties. Frontline members are generally supported by municipal employees as per the MPSA. This direct support is designed to reduce the amount of time a police officer spends on administrative duties, thereby increasing the amount of time a police officer can be on the road. Municipal employees support police operations by providing operational and administrative support. The current ratio of detachment is 1 support staff to 6.3 police officers. And since 2011, the nature of the work has increased significantly in the kind of work that we do. A lot of it's transitioned to electronic. We have moved forward into electronic disclosure to Crown prosecutors. We've also, we're moving forward in a lot of information management of all of our administration information. any information that comes to the detachment is classified under file categories, and depending on the nature of those documents, there's a retention period that has to then later be destroyed. So we have to ensure that we destroy the electronic copies as well as paper copies, and it could be 2, 5, and then in some criminal matters, it's 1,000 years. I know I won't see those files, but there are, and as those files relate to DNA and any other criminal substance that we would have to retain. So there's an administrative requirement to track and look at destruction times and ensuring that we're on track and we don't hold anything we're not supposed to hold. And recently we had one of the positions that was a half-time, 22.5 hours, 25 hours to 30 hours, and then it went to full-time. And we just successfully hired that candidate. What we're looking at is an anticipated increase of resources in 2019 to 2020. We're looking at 1 regular member and 1 municipal employee. The regular member contingent we're looking at is a community resource officer, and in the past there had been some testing of a school resource officer, then later on a community resource officer. The success of that wasn't measurable, and we were ending up in a shortfall of some of staff on our shifts, so we had to ensure officer safety and maintaining the shift schedule for operational calls. So we had to scrap that. And then that member subsequently transferred out as well. So we're constantly chasing when one transfers out, that position becomes vacant for time, defining and getting a transfer in, and then filling those positions.
Just on that question or on that comment, when you say they transferred out, that's something that's decided by somebody else, or is that the constable's decision?
It's twofold. It could be decided by somebody else based on an operational need. It also could be decided on the police officer on their career path. It also could be decided on that career path if they're moving towards promotion. So that opportunity for promotion could be at a neighboring detachment or across the country. We had an internal promotion happen on a national level. The promotion was from constable to corporal, so that was successful. But then again, that constable promoted to corporal vacated her spot, and a few months later that position was finally filled. And then we then have another vacancy where somebody was seeking opportunity in Calgary. They won that position on a lateral transfer. Now that position is still vacant. So then another member now just recently identified shortfalls. Division or the province will relate what they need for specific detachments, and this member is going to go to Assumption or Chate. That's where he wanted to go, and he's only been here 2 years. Based on an operational need, they selected him, and he's awaiting for his transfer notice. Now, transfer notices on a physical relocation, they have a potential implementation date of 90 days. So we have 3 months of where that person can find other accommodations, get transferred, move, and have somebody else fill that spot. So sometimes there's gaps, and sometimes we're lucky to have an overlap on our side. What's also happening electronically moving forward in supplying a municipal employee, a detachment service assistant, is all the tasks that are often required and relate to court disclosures. Just to give you an example, I wrote down some of the transcriptions that we would need for a statement transcription, audio-video transcription on any in-car camera systems. Recently, 2 years ago, we had a sketch artist come in, and he drew a diagram on a suspect. A part of the disclosure was also to transcribe his information he received from that person that was identifying a suspect. So we had to compile that as well within our disclosure package. So transcriptions can take, well, if you interview somebody for 25 minutes, that could basically be a 2-hour sit down and trying to transcribe all that detail of that information. And we have a format that's recognized by the courts that we have to attain to, and that's supplied within our disclosure packages. We also have an increase in, there was a service that was provided on a national level for our PROS database as well as our CPIC database, CPIC being the complete Canadian Police Information Center, PROS being our police reporting operational system. There used to be off-site reviews and scoring and looking at all these files, that, and then we would get an error report and we would do correction. Now it's all reliant upon at the local level, and having corporate knowledge from our clerical staff that they understand what that system is. They make the corrections and the validations, and they're submitted back to the province to show complete for PROS and back to national to show that they're complete on CPIC. Aside from all these other specific duties that a municipal employee will do, we also still run like any other traditional office, intake of phone calls, mail, bill payments, completing our fleet records. At the end of the month, we do our mileage, gas receipts. Those are all submitted. We have a fleet card. We have to maintain continuity of all those. And also service is organized and tracked. We also have to abide by federal law in relation to occupational health and safety. We're an office greater than 20, so we have an occupational health and safety committee. The chair of our committee is one of our clerical staff and 2 regular members. We also sit on that staff and we meet and discuss concerns around the office, as well as our standard ordering materials and supplies and equipment. We have to abide by federal law and having recognized standing offers and abide by the protocols and processes of getting that product to us. So the CRO member is defined as a community resource officer. Everything that we're typically asked for, I mean, in the past we've had the Lawrence Grassy study on cycling. It just now there's one up at Elizabeth Rummel. They're looking for police officers to sit on these committees. I attend the policing committee as well as victim services. I would like to pass off the victim services to a regular member. Various other requests were asked through the community. Tomorrow, our members on shift will be attending McHappy Day. We'll be cooking and working within the McDonald's here. So I mean, we try to involve ourselves as much as we can with the community, but keeping in mind that we're still an operational unit responding to calls for service. So the members live and breathe by what happens on the portable radio. So they're always required to attend calls for service. So oftentimes we can't meet a lot of these requests for service, which are, a lot of them are extra, but also they serve the community well because they see the police in a different light. Ceremonial duties as well. We're barely able to supply just one officer to attend. A recent example was we had a major fatality on the freeway, and then at the same time Highland Games was going on. That member freed herself up, cleared the scene as quickly as possible, and then met that obligation of appearing in red serge, marching down for the community. So those kinds of things, they're hard to do, but they're good to do for the community. And if we had a community resource officer that would either communicate that these functions were happening, they could staff resources that we have available and meet all these requirements of being visible and proactive in the community.
Councillor Seeley, you have a question?
Just about the Red Surge program,
Yep.
that protocol's changed a little bit where we used to use retired police officers, but can you just go into what that looks like now?
I mean, they're there, and often they'll consult with us first, and we try to supply a regular member. And the reason for that is the incident happened in October at the Cenotaph where honor guard, and then there was an attack on the Cenotaph, killing a military personnel, and that person then ran into the Parliament building. Every function in which you may not see, but we have something called lethal force overwatch, which there will be a uniformed member who is armed and ready to respond to any crisis should somebody want to harm the officers in those events. So I know when I used to attend marching ceremonies, I would be without my pistol. Now it's mandatory. I'm to wear my pistol in my red surge, and then you'll see other officers patrolling about or at the ready to respond and assist in those instances. So it's recommended that they don't participate because nobody knows from one officer to the next. They're wearing a ceremony outfit. They don't know that they're retired. They probably haven't worn a gun, some for 20 years, and so they don't know that. So there may be a fall victim, and we don't want that to happen. So there is a requirement that we do have that present. (2022, 2023), 2020, 2021, the General Investigation Section. It's our specialized unit. We currently have 2 members in there, 1 corporal, 1 constable, and they are the high-level skill set of our members or police officers that complete, they write authorizations in the courts. So if you want to think about a drug seizure in a residence, you have to know your reasonable probable grounds to go in. You have to have standards of investigation. Then you have to support it with documentation. And then you do what's called information to obtain a search warrant, and then you complete a search warrant. So all this requires expertise, knowledge, and how to do it. Cell phone or property that we seize, we also have to know how to either detect data that we need off of it or secure that data. So we have to do written authorizations to the courts to have that. So these members, they carry all that expertise, and they also supply that expertise to a lot of our general duty members that are doing this kind of work, or they encounter this kind of work. So they provide coaching, mentoring, subject matter expert information to them. Projects are on the grow right now, and oftentimes if I were to supply them extra resources, I'll ask for volunteers on the floor, or if there are, we have identified 2 that actually carry this knowledge and they're in uniform working, and if they're available, we'll supply them to that team to do the work. But at times they're not always on shift, and sometimes we'll just either request volunteers, or if none are available, we'll authorize overtime, and they'll be involved in the project at that time. Questions, concerns about that? And then this might feed later on to Greg's report on photo radar, 2022, 2023, looking at another municipal staff as well as 2 regular members, and we're looking at a focused and targeted municipal traffic section. So we currently don't have a dedicated municipal traffic. Any traffic cars you see that come into town will be linked to Banff's integrated traffic unit or to Cochrane's roving traffic unit. They'll come in and they'll assist, and they'll do operations. Oftentimes you'll see them off the Three Sisters overpass, and periodically I've seen them down Railway Avenue, but they'll do either traffic enforcement in targeted areas of speed, distracted driving, seat belts, and the like around theirs. We'll also focus on impaired driving in that light. So the traffic unit team would be dedicated to that. They would likely be working in a team format, working through a shift rotation together, so they're always supporting and backing each other up. Then we'll also, with that work of traffic comes a lot of administrative work, which would need to be supported directly by one municipal employee, because here again it requires the data. Supporting the ticket has to be properly entered in our PRO system, has to be prepared and presented and ready for court, the disclosure piece that goes with that. And then moving forward, if court is attended and the subject is not appearing, then a warrant is out for that person's arrest. We have to manage that data as well. So a dedicated municipal employee clerk would support that as well. Questions? Accommodation, that building has been there since 1986, I believe, and it's good for now, but if we were to grow in our personnel, we would also need to grow the office physically. Looking around the office right now, I could, with some modifications or remodeling, I could support probably 2 members and another support staff, but outside of that, we would need extra space or bigger space.
I remember touring that, 5 or 6 years ago, touring your offices, and it seemed pretty packed at that time. Yeah,
the office furniture looks really nice, but it takes up a lot of space. There's a lot of wasted space in there, and the 2 or 3 detachment commanders previous got it on a deal, as in free. So, so it's definitely done a lot of, I mean, it's outlived its purpose, and it didn't cost anybody anything, but now we got to make some changes. So there's a lot of wasted space and some redesign, and smaller office furniture would definitely make better use of that space. And then the extra costs, or the equipment costs. AFRACs, which we just had some of the hardware installed. That's the Alberta infrastructure that's going around emergency communication. It's going to be a digital system. Naloxone, every member is supplied at least 2 naloxone kits, and we're trained in that as well, but they have an expiration date. They last 2 years, so we have to destroy them. Should we have extra members or increase in complement of members, we'll need a police car to support those extra numbers. Yep.
Can I just interrupt that? I don't know what naloxone is for.
Sorry?
I don't know what naloxone is.
Oh, okay. Narcan is another name for it. What it is, we carry the nasal spray portion. So if a person is overdosing on an opiate and they're unconscious, we can go up and provide the dosage through the nasal passages, give a couple sprays, and then they're alive and well for about 30 minutes, because we have to get them to emergency service as quickly as possible, and ensure that they get medical help right after then the naloxone or the Narcan is provided.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanford, you had a question?
I had a question going back to the detachment, and if there is need to renovate or increase the size of it, yep. Seeing that the building actually belongs to the RCMP, yep. Is that correct? So if there's there's a need to create more floor space, what would be the process? Do you have to start now to consider it?
Yeah, Mr. Jack Pollock is my property manager, and he's going to be down in about a week and a half time, and we're going to have that discussion for some of that remodeling in the office space, and get some timelines and get things started on that.
So is there room there for increase in square footage on that property?
Is there room for it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Apparently it can go up or it can go back.
And so he'll be looking at the alternatives for that as well?
But
okay.
Like I say, currently right now I can supply space for our on-duty members now, or the staff that we have, just with some remodeling, reconfiguration.
So for a few more years, but we're going to be looking at probably some expansion in the future.
Yes.
Okay. And that belongs to the RCMP?
Right now it's the RCMP on the province side, and what the municipal does is they pay lease or pay rent for 70% portion of that, and as well as some maintenance.
Okay, so you're looking to the future for the size. Okay, thank you.
Just thinking about that, is there any likelihood that there would be consideration of building up and including some living quarters for, I don't know, unmarried officers or?
That's
married?
A good question. I haven't seen quarters attached to a detachment for a number of years now. I mean, they have that headquarters, but they also have training barracks there, so they have the room for that. But generally, when I worked at Maidstone before they built that office, that was an old 50s style building where the detachment and then quarters were the two-story piece attached to it. They don't really do that anymore. So quarters is, I know Canmore is in a unique position, different than Banff, where there are some quarters provided, but Canmore doesn't have a provision to provide quarters for our members and staff.
Yeah, just thinking about the usual shortage of accommodation, it might be something to think about when you're doing plans.
Sorry?
Might be something worth thinking about
Yes.
when you do plans.
Yeah, you could explore that. It would be, here again, Jack Pollock is the man. I could talk to him about that. I know Banff has secured recently a lot of quarters for their members, and that's the piece that they have that's attractive to going to Banff, is having government quarters supplied. I can explore that option. Worthwhile,
well.
thank you. And the last two pieces of equipment, they're the ion scanner and the fume hood. That relates to any of the opiates or any other drugs that would come in and have some either off-gassing or dusts, that kind of thing. So it provides a safe area where we can secure our exhibits, and it goes up into a fume, and it's it's a non-filter type hood, so it'll fit within our exhibit room. It's charcoal based, I believe. And the last piece is a signature. But as
Councillor Comfort?
On the fume hood and the ion scanner?
Yep.
I believe that in the report it says you would consider sharing that with other services.
Yes.
What did you have in mind?
Well, there's currently 5 in the district being Red Deer South to the BC Alberta, BC Saskatchewan US borders. There's 37 detachments in there, and they've got 5. And really reasonably, they can't service all the areas. They've got them strategically located. I believe a strategic location for the Bow Valley would be Canmore detachment, because everybody does tend to come through here. We had secured a number of large drug exhibits in the past from the roving traffic unit and the integrated traffic unit, as well as our on-shift members. So this ideally would be a good location for that.
So it can be a real health hazard for officers and firefighters, paramedics, I believe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're given training. We're also given personal protection equipment. We have masks, clothing, gloves. We have either half face mask or a full face mask that we're used and trained to examine those items.
Okay, thank you.
Just moving, I just have one question related to attachment 1, the financial planning and reporting document article 17 and 17.1a indicates that each fiscal year the member in charge and the CEO will, in an agreed format and schedule, exchange information, etc. And in municipal speak, the CEO is the mayor or reeve. Is that what's intended with this Article 17.1?
Sorry, is that which?
So it suggests in Article 17.1a that each year the member in charge, that would be yourself, would exchange information necessary for the RCMP.
Yes.
With the mayor or the reeve. I see.
I can likely answer that.
Mr. Burt.
There was lots of meetings.
Yes. So it's delegated through to the CAO and then delegated through to myself as the person that oversees the contract.
And that's through our standard delegation policy. Dr. Cottle?
It's defined in the agreement. The CEO is defined as the chief executive officer or the mayor or reeve, so you, but elected, not administrative, so you. But yes, through delegation, it is delegated to Mr. Burt to meet with the RCMP. If you would like to meet with him yourself, I'm sure we can arrange that.
Nope, just want to be sure of process. Thank you. Are there any questions at this time from council for either of the gentlemen? Seeing none, thanks very much for that fulsome description of the future plan, recognizing that it is, as Mr. Burt indicated, something that we would take for planning purposes, and each year we'll understand how it may roll out, and council would approve any impact to budget as a result.
Yep.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
With that, I'll move that council approve the Canmore Municipal Detachment multi-year financial plan for planning purposes. And speaking of the motion, given what we've just acknowledged, that it's only for planning purposes this time, and any impact year to year would be discussed through budget discussions and approvals, I'm quite prepared to support this motion. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. As a council representative on the policing committee, we did take a look at this and we approved it. The last time the RCMP had an increase to the officer complement was in 2008. Staff Sergeant Aeneas has shown good leadership and a financial plan that supports policing priorities. So I'm happy to support this for planning purposes.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we'll move on to item G3, Wildfire Mitigation Strategy. Mr. Burt.
All right. Although it may not feel like it today, it's already wildfire season in Alberta. Myself and Stu Walkinshaw are here this evening to present the updated wildfire mitigation strategy. The staff recommendation is to approve the wildfire mitigation strategy for planning purposes. I did want to highlight that if approved, this does address Action R 3.1 from the Climate Change Adaptation and Resilience Plan that Council approved in September of 2016. That was to update the Fire Smart mitigation strategy. Prior to turning this over to Stu, I want to remind Council that this is for planning purposes, and any of the recommendations that have costs associated will be part of the regular budget process. I'm starting to sound like a broken record. We'll continue to seek grants through the Forest Resources Improvement Association of Alberta, another acronym for you, FREA. We have received over $450,000 in grants from FREA and the Government of Alberta since 2013 to conduct Fire Smart work. And we currently have another 2 grants that we've submitted for $135,000 that we're awaiting approval for. So we've received a large amount of support from the province for Fire Smart efforts within the community. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Stu Walkinshaw. Stu lives and works from Canmore, providing Fire Smart specialist services to communities across Alberta. Stu has worked in wildfire management since 1979. I was about that tall when you were starting to work. You've been involved with Fire Smart planning, implementation in the Bow and Kananaskis valleys for many years. Stu, he didn't include this in his bio, but he travels around quite a bit doing structural protection and was integral in some of the work occurring in Waterton last year. Stu developed the first Fire Smart plan for the town of Canmore and has prepared the updated 2018 review for discussion tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Stu Walkinshaw to walk you through the strategy.
Thanks very much. And welcome once again to Council Chambers, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Thank you very much. So I've put together a real brief presentation for everybody today. I'm just going to run through the plan itself, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview from the 30,000-foot level. As Greg was saying, town has completed 2 previous Fire Smart plans back in 2000 and 2010. And it's interesting to note that there have been significant accomplishments in implementation of the recommendations in those two plans over that time period. It became time to take a look at what had been accomplished and what new priorities needed to be focused on over the next 5 to 10 year period. And that's what this update was all about. So we updated the hazard assessment, reviewed the accomplishments that had been taken in the last 10 or 15 years, and set new priorities, you know, for the next 5-year period. And what I'm going to provide you with this evening are the observations from this review and the new recommendations for your consideration. The reviewed hazard assessment. Most of you have probably seen this, this map now, either through the land use bylaw review process, or through the newspaper, or through the BODA presentation. It's interesting to note there's still lots of red and lots of orange up there, and that's not a good thing from a wildfire perspective. But the Bow Valley is built of evergreen trees, and evergreen trees burn very well. So I think it's just important to understand that we will always have lots of wildfire threat in this valley. And what we need to do is we need to focus on reducing that threat in the important areas that are immediately adjacent to, you know, development. And that's really where this plan focuses on. The updated hazard assessment review recognized that there are about 35 days per year of very high to extreme fire weather indices. Primarily evergreen fuels, as I said earlier. The result of that is that extreme fire behavior potential exists with the potential for long-range ember spotting. And the impact of that is that it doesn't matter if you're right next to the trees, that burning embers can and will be landing in many different locations throughout town. The perimeter developments are at the highest risk in town. The central core of town is at less a threat. And I think the last thing that's important to recognize in the updated hazard assessment is that the vegetation management that has been going on over the last 10 to 15 years has created some significant fuel breaks and reduced hazard next to community in a very positive